The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest stories in the NBA.
The Oklahoma City Thunder play the perfect game.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're talking about the Thunder getting a big win over the Cleveland Cavaliers. At one point, the Thunder led by 42 points. They end up winning 134-114 without Chet Holmgren, without Isaiah Hartenstein, and solidifying the biggest win of the season, albeit technically the smallest win of the season with their small ball lineups. But when you look at this game, you know, I picked the Thunder to lose this game both on Locked On Thunder and on Thunder on SI. And the reality was, on both of those platforms, I mentioned for the Thunder to win this game, it's not impossible. The path to victory is there. It's just so difficult to reach that path that it's hard to predict it to happen, you know, and that they were still going to be great without Hartenstein. But in this particular matchup, it's going to be very difficult. But the Thunder played the absolute perfect game. They took this roster and got the absolute most out of it to win this game. And there's a few different reasons for that. So let's just go over from yesterday's podcast, which had a lot of people hooting and hollering. Right. By the way, those same people never to be found whenever I pick the Thunder to win and they lose to the Wemby-less Spurs, but alas. So in the first half, the Thunder shot 57.9% from three and blew out Cleveland. What did I say on yesterday's show? They need an outstanding, otherworldly shooting game. Check. When the game was in the balance, check. Now they only finished with 34% from three. They played a ton of garbage time. Adam Flagler could not stop, shooting the basketball in the fourth quarter. I don't blame him for that, but it did mess with the percentages. So that's a check mark right there. They needed Shea to have an MVP level game and go for 40-50. He went for 40 in 3 quarters. Had this game actually been in the balance, you easily could have seen him, going for 50. So let's call that a check mark as well. You needed Jalen Williams to be big in this game, and I believe he was. I mean, again, the box score is not going to be indicative of how great that J-Dub was. It was only 19 points on 57% shooting, but the defense was just outstanding. 3 steals, 2 blocks, so that's a big check. And then you had to get another game. Like whenever you're talking games, you're talking the Isaiah Joe 8 games in the Garden. You're talking Aaron Wiggins going off against New York in the Paycom Center. You had to get an outlier game, for lack of a better term. You got 3 of them. I mean, you got a 6-for-9 shooting game from Lou Dort. Big game Lou continues to be there. You got a 4-for-7 shooting game from Isaiah Joe, making 57% of his threes. You had Brandon Carlson go 3-for-6 from 3 and just enter the game in the first quarter, and in that first quarter alone, get 6 points, 2 for 2 from beyond the arc. And entering that fourth quarter of garbage time, he had 8 points, the exact same amount as Donovan Mitchell, which brings us to our next point. If you're going to win this game, you have to give no wiggle room to Mitchell and to Garland, because you're going to have to kind of concede something in the paint. And so those 2 guys cannot break loose. That's another big check. Mitchell finishes with 8 points on 3-for-15 shooting. And Garland did go for 20. I thought it was a really impressive game from Garland. He capitalized on some of the open ones, but he also hit some really difficult shots. And Garland was just really good in this game, but you limited Mitchell. And then the unforeseen happened, something that you could not have predicted. And for everyone victory lapping in the comments about believing and being a homer in this Thunder team, I grant you that. Great job picking the Thunder. No one would have guessed that Jared Allen played 16 minutes and that Evan Mobley played 18 minutes in this entire game. Now, some of that is garbage time, but not so fast, my friend. For comparison's sakes, What happened in this game was the Thunder deserve a ton of credit for dictating the terms and conditions of this game. When everybody knew what was going to happen, they were going to have to play small. They forced Cleveland into going small. How did they do it? They sped up Cleveland. They got them rushed, and they got them into turnovers. They scored 30 points off of turnovers. And Cleveland felt like, okay, like kind of in a sense of panic where the Thunder can overwhelm you. Okay, well, we've got to go small for small. That way we're athletic across the board, and we can also kind of negate some of this stuff in transition. And last week in the first half, Mobley and Allen played 16 minutes in the first half alone. Total tonight, Mobley and Allen played 18 and 16. In the first half of this game, those two guys, they had over 16 points on Wednesday. These two guys have 13 minutes, 13 minutes tonight after being over 16 minutes on Wednesday. They just took them out of the game. They tried to go small and match the Thunder, but guess what? There's no other team in the league designed to play small ball the way Oklahoma City is. They're legitimately built for it. So when you try to play their game, there's nothing you can do. Like, you've lost at that point. It's the same thing that happened to Willie Green in the playoffs. It's the same thing that's happened to many coaches. The only coach who's been disciplined enough to not go small is Jason Kidd, but that's a very unique set of circumstances because Jason Kidd, of course, he has two bigs who you're going to play for 48 minutes no matter what. There's not really another option. They tried to go small, Cleveland did, and it just did not work. And on the flip side of all of that, like to put a bow on all that, the Thunder did what they had to do. The Thunder executed to an extremely high level, and Cleveland did not. Cleveland kept kicking the ball left, right, and center, 21 turnovers. They only shot 31% from three. And they just had no rhythm to their offense. They had no sense of groove, no sense of purpose. I mean, in that first half, when they're still trying to make a run, they shot 8 for 20 from three. They made 43% of their shots. It was over. It was over. So the Thunder deserve a lot of credit for doing everything right. The checklist that we laid out yesterday on this show, they executed it to a T. I don't know how many more times you can get their perfect game if you just kept playing this game over and over again, but all you needed it for was tonight. And they won. And that's the making of this team. I think that the only takeaway, I told you yesterday that like this game, just based on the makeup of the Thunder, it couldn't really give you a massive takeaway because they don't have Chet, they don't have Hartenstein, and like there's no scenario where this team reaches their apex without those two guys. But the thing about this team that you have to appreciate is their ability to answer the call and adapt. You can close your eyes right now and think of a lot of teams around the NBA, particularly one in Phoenix and many others, that if they went into a game with on paper this much of a mismatch, this much of a kind of tilted affair, they wouldn't have even shown up. They wouldn't have even competed. But you can trust this Thunder team to compete night in and night out, just like we said yesterday, and they went and got the win. And shout out to the crowd. I mean, the crowd was incredible. The crowd was into it from the word go, and it sounds silly because the Thunder fans are always great, but it just felt, sitting there, that the fan base knew this team needs some extra oomph behind it. And they delivered. They delivered on the court. They delivered off the court. And the Thunder get their biggest win of the year. I know that they just beat Boston. I get it. And I still would consider Boston a better title contender than Cleveland. I think that all three teams are in tier one, but if you had to then rank tier one, I think you go, with Boston and Oklahoma City ahead of Cleveland. But I get you just beat Boston. This was a totally different beast where you're playing Mobley and Allen without a big man and you play them off the floor. That's really impressive.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Pacers win in Detroit. They beat the Pistons, their 5th straight road win.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast.
A fun game just happened right on the score behind me between the Pacers and Pistons. 111-100, the final score. Pacers defended quite well, but they needed enough offense to get it done, and they only had it in the first half. Miles Turner was awesome. Their offense looked great for that first, let's say, 30 minutes of this game. Tyrese Haliburton was back in the lineup. Aaron Nesmith returned his first game in 35 games. Pascal Siakam was great in the first half. So much to get to from a big Pacers win. I didn't talk about this before the game because we did trade deadline stuff yesterday, but these two teams close in the standings. The play-in battle between them could actually matter as the Pistons are ascending and quite good this season, 1-1 in the season series entering this game. To get 2 road wins in Detroit this year could prove to be very important for the Pacers. We have to start with what I think is the story of the game because of what it was in terms of actually what happened and because of what it led to for the rest of the Pacers. That's Miles Turner, who was awesome shooting the ball. Actually, a little bit upset when we talked to him post-game that he didn't set his career high in threes. He only tied it 8 triples for Miles Turner in this game. The Pacers made 13 as a team. Miles Turner and Aaron Nesmith were 10 for 14 from 3. The rest of the Pacers were 3 for 16. So those two were crucial. But of course, Miles Turner, when you hit 8 and the rest of your team only hits 5, you're huge. The Pistons made 9 as a team in this game, right? One more miss from any Piston, and Miles Turner would have matched them in threes by himself. Full stop. That's impressive, right? It's hard to ask about that after the game. How important is it that this player made shots? Duh, that's the point of the sport. And Miles Turner did a wonderful job of it in this game, right? And they were all good looks. He took 11, and I'd say only 2 of them were, I'll say 3. 2 heat checks, which he earned, and 1 really tough fading late clock one in the first quarter. But he actually made that late clock toughie, and that was kind of my moment where I was like, oh, this could be a thing where Miles gets something going. And the way that this battle works between him and Jalen Duren has been very similar for the last couple seasons, right? For all the things Miles did great in this game, you know, we know what Duren's going to do against Miles Turner. He's going to smash the glass, and he did. Duren had 17 boards, 6 offensive rebounds. He's going to score inside. Duren didn't miss. He was 8 for 8. Jalen Duren was still minus 16 because he can't defend against Turner. And Turner, while he, you know, the specific battle right there wasn't good. Turner did good team defense. He had 3 blocks and 2 steals, and he was plus 16, right? He dominated that battle despite Duren having some nice offensive nights. And it starts with that offensive end. So obviously, again, full stop, making 8 threes is huge. And Turner's pick and pop feel was really good in this game. Duren really wants to drop back. His defense is kind of shaky, and Turner took advantage of that. The Pistons really wanted to stop the drives from Haliburton or Nembhard or McConnell. You know, usually the guy setting up Turner in this game was Tyrese Haliburton, who had 8 assists, 6 for Andrew Nembhard. And they were really determined to not let those guys get to the rim. And a lot of the Pacers offense is that. Their point guards driving, their best players getting to the basket. And the JB Bickerstaff, good defensive coach, he didn't want that to happen. He cut him off pretty well. So he said, okay, the pop's open right there. Let's just pass it to that guy. And Turner hit his first one. I think it was the first Pacers points of the game, or maybe the second Pacers points of the game. And then he had another one, and then he hit that tough fading one, and then it just kept going and going where he could pop open and get open and hit it. And it felt like any 3 he got was a good shot. So here's how that changed everything for the Pacers. Obviously, it's good to hit 8 threes, but you saw this in the second half of the game. There were 2 consecutive shots for the Pacers. One that ended with a layup where wide open Siakam corner 3 was the first one. He actually missed that wide open corner 3. And then a bucket a couple possessions later from I forget who on a layup driving from the right side, where the defense was just terrified of Miles Turner shooting a 3. Rush out to defend him or defend the ball handler to make sure that was cut off, and the Pacers would score something else, right? That got Andrew Nembhard a bucket at the rim. That got, like I said, that Siakam corner 3. I can't find the second shot for some reason, but it became very clear quickly in the third quarter that the Pistons now were changing what they were doing defensively from guarding the pick and pops or pick and rolls the way they were to, okay, we have to be a little more attentive to Miles Turner at the expense of other guys. Now, to the Pistons' credit, they defended much better in the second half. That strategy proved fruitful, although Turner still got free for, I think, 2 or 3 threes in the second half. But most of the Pacers' successful attempts they got in the third quarter were because of Turner, because of the gravity he provided in those moments. Did a good job picking on that to keep things flowing and get the shots they wanted. It was a Siakam corner 3 followed by a Haliburton basket from Siakam that I am talking about, by the way. If you want to go back and find, or a layup too. If you want to go back and find the clips, it's with about 7 or 6 minutes to go in that third quarter, and that just kept going. The Pacers offense totally stalled. They had a terrible 9 minutes right after that, but Turner was not on the floor for some of that. Thomas Bryant came in. They tried some small groups. They tried a huge group with Toppin, Siakam, and Turner at one point. That's how good Turner was playing. It changed their whole rotation, as did Nesmith's return and Matherin's suspension. But I think the biggest way that this game went the Pacers' way, and the reason they were able to change their strategy and still get good shots in the second half, was all because of how hot Miles Turner was from deep. 28 points on 16 shots for Miles Turner. 1 for 5 on twos. He would like to have those back, certainly. Only 3 free throws, only 3 rebounds, but 5 stocks and 28 points on that many threes, plus 16, a team high. They rode him 37 minutes for Turner. That's more than they usually play him. He came in earlier in the fourth quarter than normal. Defense was good, particularly his team defense was good in this game, and his shot changed everything for the Pacers offensive. I thought that was the story for the Pacers offensively of the game. If you want to go to the other end of the floor, I think the story of the game for the Pacers was Andrew Nembhard. Was he good defending Cade Cunningham in this game? I couldn't tell what was going on with the Pacers rotation at first, because they closed the first quarter with Nembhard, McConnell together, and that's unusual. It's usually Halliburton, McConnell together. And then I realized that early in the second quarter, when Nembhard came back in, the second Cade Cunningham came back in. Oh, they're matching those guys' minutes. In fact, Nembhard played more than Cade and matched all 39 minutes and 10 seconds of Cade Cunningham's minutes in this game. Cade Cunningham, a monster player. He's going to be an all-star for the first time this season. The biggest part of many of the Pistons turnaround has him being awesome this year. 7 for 21. Tough night. 33.3% from the field, including 1 of 7 from deep. Some of those were fine looks that he just missed, and we've seen him capable of making them. He just did a great job drilling them, even against the Knicks in a very recent, high-profile Pistons win, but really struggled inside the arc, right? You can do the math. That's still 6 for 14 on twos. That's below 50%, which is kind of the watermark for an okay night inside the arc. And holding Cade has been really tough recently. I mean, he just had 36 in the Garden, 22 and 17 the game before that, 32 the game before that. He's just been a monster, right? He only had 13 the game before that because he only played 23 minutes because they beat the Nets by so much. Then 32 before that, 40 before that. He's been crushing, and Andrew Nembhard did a really good job defending him. In fact, Cade Cunningham at 33%, that's his second worst shooting percentage in a game this whole season. He had a 28.6% night against Toronto, and every other game has been better than the night he had today scoring the ball. And a lot of that was Andrew Nembhard's defense, and that's why they matched him to his minutes. I mean, they have Nesmith back. We'll get to that later, but Nesmith barely played in this game despite starting, which makes sense given, how they work players back from injury. We'll talk about that. But the way Nembhard defended Cade did everything to slow down the Pistons, and that's not even where this ends. Cade did have 9 assists. That was probably his biggest impact in this game, but he had 7 turnovers, and that's probably been the biggest stain on his supreme season is the turnovers. He's had pretty high turnover games a lot this year. 7 is tied for his third most turnovers this season. They're dimming the lights in here, so you get a very darkened Little Caesars behind me. I don't even think you guys can tell. But either way, to have his third most turnovers in a game this year and his second worst shooting night says a lot about the pressure that the Pacers were putting on him, primarily with Andrew Nembhard, but you could see it when he'd come around a screen and try to look towards the basket and see where he could attack. Not only was Nembhard fighting through that screen to get in his face, the big or whoever was defending the screener would show. So Cade had to pause for just a second, get back, Nembhard recovers. They did a really good job staying connected specifically on him. Some other ball handlers got free. Marcus Sasser was wide open a few times. I don't think the Pacers are too worried about that. Asar Thompson had some very impressive drives, I thought, in the first half of this game, but outside of a Tim Hardaway flurry early, like none of the other shooters or ball handlers for Detroit felt that dominant with the ball in their hands, and that's a ton of credit to the Pacers scheme they had against them, and that's a ton of credit to Andrew Nembhard, who, I mean, he's making a case for all defense, like a very strong case for all defense. Unfortunately for him, I think the way the league goes, it's positionless now. Like bigs have become a little bit more valuable on the defensive end, but among the guards in the NBA this season, it's hard not to argue he's been one of the best 5 guard defenders in the league. And the night he just had against Cade, one of his best of the season, especially shutting down one individual like that. I mean, not that Cade is everything to the Pistons, but you watch the game, you saw their other creators. And with Jaden Ivey out, Tobias Harris can kind of do stuff with the ball, but he's not a ball stopper. That's a little harsh, but it does stick with him a little more. He has to turn and face a little bit. It's not the same. And they don't have the other creators who can shoot like Cade. So once Tim Hardaway cooled off, I think he had 3 threes in the first couple minutes. Pistons couldn't get anything going with their perimeter guys, and Andrew Nembhard shutting off the water of the best creator for the Pistons was a big part of that. So on one end of the floor, the Pacers were carried by Miles Turner, who hit his own shots and opened up stuff for everybody else. On the other end, it was Andrew Nembhard doing a great job on the defensive end, shutting down Cade Cunningham. That's how the Pacers got this one done.
From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add a little bit of juice to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. It's going to be a scoring barrage in Detroit on Saturday night. FanDuel has the total for the Commanders-Lions game set at, oh my goodness, 55.5. That's a Big 12 line. Holy cow, 55.5. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
We remember when Dwyane Wade turned to the team during his statue unveiling in the fall. He said, "A house divided does not stand." Well, Dwyane talked about that on his podcast this week, saying, quote, "I stood up there and I said that because the grass isn't always greener. If you don't want to be here and don't like the way things are working here and you don't like it, then don't be here because this is not the organization for that." That quote made the rounds plenty. I think it kind of just confirmed what we thought he was saying during the statue event anyway. But here's the quote that really caught my eye. Mm-hmm. He says, quote, we were all looking at Riles, Pat Riley, like, what's going on over there? Because you're tripping. We're used to iron fists. We don't hear iron fists going on over there. End quote. That to me is interesting. And he's talking about sort of former Heat players. And right. Pat Riley has always run that Miami Heat organization with the iron fist, but he's not as hands-on as he once was, right? He has very much kind of handed the reins to Nick Arison and Andy Ellisberg and Eric Spoelstra, certainly, maybe more than anybody. And as times have changed, right, you have to kind of change with the personnel and the star players and the way that they expect to be treated. And one of the things that we've known about Jimmy Butler and that's kind of gotten more widely known and gained traction over the last week was the fact that he would take private planes and he would stay away from the team hotel at times. And he did get just special treatment that Dwyane Wade says he didn't get, LeBron did not get, like those guys did not get that 10 years ago when Eric Spoelstra was basically fresh to the job. And now that Spo's been in this job for a long time and they were trying to attract more star players and ultimately got Jimmy Butler, it does seem like that iron fist that Riley and for a little while Eric Spoelstra practiced, it does not. Dwyane Wade is saying that that's not the case anymore, and he's a little shocked by it. So what do you make of these comments?
So is he basically stating that he thinks Jimmy's been coddled by the organization?
Just treated special,
gently,
just treated differently.
Coddled. I mean, yeah, I think it sounds like coddled. You know,
coddled is fine. Certainly different than how they treated Dwyane and LeBron. And Dwyane even said he's like he thought he needed something different when he left for Chicago, and he realized he did not need that. He needed the guidelines and the guardrails and the iron fist in order to, maximize his own ability. And I think that he's basically claiming that Jimmy is going to come to that realization also.
Yeah, no, I that part, I think we're likely to find, we're absolutely going to see that manifest in some way. And I know this is an older, perhaps more mature version of Jimmy than the player that was in Minnesota all those years ago and stuff like that. But I mean, he had it good here. And that's not to say, again, that the organization didn't, they made mistakes. They didn't do things perfectly. You can even go so far as to say that they didn't do things very well in terms of building around him or trying not to ruffle his feathers as much as they did. But in terms of allowing a lot of the things that happened, of being a place where he was comfortable to be who he is,
they treated him like a star.
He's not going to find that
the only organization that ever treated him like a star, like the face of the franchise. In Minnesota, it was him, Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins. Wiggins was a number one pick. Cat was a number one pick. Those guys are the face of the franchise. Jimmy Butler was only there to support. Joel Embiid was the face of the franchise in Philadelphia. Chicago was much earlier in his career, but he was never that for them.
No.
This was the first place that made him the face of the franchise. You are the star, and we're going to treat you like the star. Like star players in today's NBA are accustomed to being treated. Russell Westbrook getting to dictate what's in the vending machines in Oklahoma City, right? Like that's what the star player gets these days. And it's essentially what Jimmy Butler had here.
So he's not going to get that in Milwaukee. He's not going to get that in Phoenix. I don't know who the star is in Phoenix. I imagine it's probably Devin Booker just because of his long-term tenure.
Booker's the face of the franchise. Yeah.
So it's not going to work out as well as he thinks it is. To Dwayne's point, the grass is not going to be as green as you might think it is. And so he's going to learn that the hard way, but at least he'll get the green that he wants, even if the grass isn't it. So,
what about Dwyane Wade's comments? There was some aimed at Jimmy here, but there was some clearly also aimed at the organization. It's based on these comments. It sounds like he's taking aim on the organization. What happened here? You used to have an iron fist. What happened? We're all wondering what happened. That's directed at the organization and maybe blaming them for letting this slip a little bit. Yeah.
But how would that have fixed things? Like, again, we're seeing in Jimmy a player that when they put up the wall or when they say this far, no further, that's when Jimmy kind of reacts negatively, as we've seen him react over the last few weeks. I don't know that if the iron fist had been there from day one, I don't know, or even over the last few years, I don't know that it would have helped. It seems like it might have just exacerbated things or had them manifest even sooner than they expected them to. So I don't know. I think it's a different. I mean, as much as Jimmy and Dwyane are friends and everything else, I think like they're the generation of players and the expectations are different. Like, even when Dwyane was drafted in 2003, like we're talking about 21 years ago, the league has evolved, and since then the players and their mentality, not in a bad way, there's no judgment attached to this. It's just the players understand that there are larger stakes here. There's a brand building process that comes with being a part of the NBA, and I don't think that they don't respond well to it. Like we've seen this with the players, a lot of the recent players we had an episode recently where a lot of former players were like, you have to have these expectations. You're under contract. You have to live up to the contract. And they were kind of chastising Jimmy for being the way that he has been. And now this is a friend in Dwyane who's basically saying, you are making a mistake here. I'm sure he loves Jimmy and respects what he's doing. But at the same time, I think there's an understanding too that he probably would not have responded well. Like, and to your point though, criticizing the Heat front office, I don't know. I get it. I understand that perspective, but I also think the Heat probably handle it the way that they thought was appropriate in terms of giving him the space to be who he is, and it still wound up biting them in the ass anyway. So I don't know if it necessarily would have made a difference.
There had been some whispers. There had been some whispers over the last few years that Heat culture stuff had slipped a little bit, right? And when you consider Jimmy Butler missing some shoot-arounds and not necessarily being punished in the moment, kind of using this to put papers together and ultimately serve him a 7-game suspension. Maybe that's their way of punishing them in 2024, 2025. But you had heard whispers that maybe that culture had slipped a little bit. Now, I will say this. Maybe Jimmy Butler's eventual exit paves the way for them to reclaim some of that iron fist culture, right? It won't be what it was under Pat Riley, but it can't be missing shoot-arounds, and it can't be some of the stuff that has happened behind the scenes with Jimmy Butler, I don't think, unless you get another star player. But I think in the short term, at least, with the group that you have, I do think that what you need more than what's allowed and not allowed is sort of the buy-in. To go back to Dwyane Wade's stuff, you're either in or you're out. And it just seemed like for so long the Heat had been that. You're either in or you're out. And Jimmy Butler kind of seemed like he was always a little out. Kyle Lowry, never fully in.
No.
Right? Like there had been some of that. And so it wasn't like you're either in or you're out. Like sometimes you could toe the line these last few years. And I think Jimmy had been. And so when he does eventually leave, I think maybe that's more than anything. It doesn't have to be so militaristic, but are you into what we're doing or are you out? And if you're in, then you're in.
Yeah, one of the stories that really stood out to me over the last week of reporting, the idea that Jimmy and Kyle walking next to each other in the middle of practice, just basically saying, "I'm done," and just having the kind of freedom to just be like, I don't want to participate anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And then you kind of think back to the stories that we've heard of Riley in the middle of practice, basically telling Todd Day to get the hell out of my team. That is such a contrast to this. Like, this was a guy,
Right.
Todd Day, obviously not a star or anything like that, but a guy who had made some comments and kind of showed that maybe he wasn't quite, ready to fit the culture. And then he just canned him right on the spot. And then could you imagine like the kind of what Spoelstra must have been feeling as he sees Jimmy and Kyle just kind of say, man, we're just kind of done. We don't want to practice.
And it's not
For a
just all
guy
on
like-
Spo either, right? We know who's in, like Pat Riley,
Yeah,
Andy
we've seen them practice
Ellisberg,
this,
Alonzo Mourning, Nick Harrison. Those guys sit in on these practices. It's all of them watching this kind of happen and allowing it to happen. And to your point, David, thinking that they had to, thinking that it was the best thing for the organization. And I think sometimes, and Dwyane Wade said this, if you don't stand on anything, then what are you really standing for as an organization? Understanding that there's going to be faults with it, that you're not going to get every player. But if you don't stand for anything, then you just end up like a lot of these sort of aimless organizations. And if there's one thing about the Miami Heat that we have been able to say over the years, they weren't aimless. You always kind of knew what they were working toward. And lately, obviously, they've become a little aimless as they sort of trudge in the middle of NBA standings here. But I think when Jimmy Butler eventually leaves, I would expect maybe a tightening of the culture, so to speak, for the guys who are in that locker room. Again, the culture evolves. You and I have talked about this many times. The culture evolves, right? And it evolves somewhat to reflect the players there. And I think the players here now, post Jimmy Butler, will be Bam and Tyler Hero. And what is it that they look at? They look at internal development and things like that. I think you'll see the culture start to reflect that perhaps a little bit more.